Okay, hi everybody and welcome. This is Mike from Learning Times. We're going to get started in just a quick moment. Before we do, I just wanted to let everybody know that we are here, or I am here to provide you with tech support if required. So feel free to communicate with me in the chat, which you will find at the bottom of your screen if you require any tech support with the Zoom application, and I will be here to help. If you have questions for our presenters, of course, you'll be able to use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to ask questions. So we'll go ahead and turn things over to Robin.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another C2C Care webinar. Before I start, I would like to acknowledge that this webinar is being moderated on the traditional lands of the Miccosukee and Seminole people and their ancestors, and I pay my respect to elders, both past and present. Well, I'm really excited for everyone to join us today. This should be a slightly different program for C2C Care, but we are hoping you all will enjoy it. But to start off, I'm going to do a quick intro slides, and then we'll jump right into our program. You are here for the C2C Care Labeling Lightning Round. We'll be going from 1 to 2:30 p.m. Eastern. So just keep an eye on the clock and we'll be sure to keep on time for everyone this afternoon. My name is Robin Bauer-Kilgo. I am the C2C Care Coordinator, and you just saw Mike Morneau. He's our senior producer at Learning Times. Just a real quick reminder, because we should have a pretty large audience today, that this is our home on the web, connecting to collections.org. There you will be able to find all sorts of fun information about our program. So you'll be able to view our full webinar archives and our full course archives. There are a lot of webinars and courses out there available for free for anyone to view. So feel free to go ahead and poke around the webinar whenever you have a chance, or if you have a topic that you are interested in, feel free to do that as well. And you'll be able to find programming that goes back almost a decade now of just information on collections care. We also have a community that you are able to access. The community is a moderated space. If you have a question about anything related to collections care, you can post a question there, and a fabulous group of moderators will actually take a look at it and give you some really good information on how to deal with it. So I would encourage anyone who is interested in our program to post a question on there if you're ever interested. We are on 2 spots on social media. We are on Facebook at C2C Community and on Twitter at C2C Care. We post announcements for upcoming programming there, along with a lot of other information. So feel free to, if you're on either one of those social media outlets, to go ahead and link to us. Our upcoming program, we actually have a pretty full slate happening this spring, so we're pretty excited to announce some webinars. More information can be found on our website, but the 2 immediate programs that you should know about is a course actually starting on March called Planning and Managing Magnetic Media Preservation Projects. The actual program, it's a course, so you are charged for it, but it's a 5 webinar series dealing with how to deal with those piles and piles of VHS tapes and other bits of magnetic media you might find in your collection. It's going to be a nuts and bolts course, so it's actually going to lead you from doing an inventory to actually dealing with an outside vendor to help with any kind of aspect of it. So I would encourage you all to go to the website and take a look at it. The early registration fee is actually pushed through till, I believe, February 15th. So if you're interested in it, please sign up there. On March 10th, we'll be doing another free webinar with the Realm Project. The registration will be opening soon. It's a really interesting project they've been dealing when it comes to the opening of institutions related to COVID-19. So I would encourage you to sign up for that webinar if you want to. Again, that one is free. And then as part of the annual conference happening with AIC and Spinach, there is actually a great course or a great workshop happening that is directly related to this. You can sign up for it. It's a maximum of 30 participants. It's how to label and mark your collections. From my understanding, the plan is to actually send you a kit. So you'll actually get your own little supply kit on how to label items. So if you're interested, you're a member of AIC, you want to sign up for that workshop, please go look at culturalheritage.org and you can sign up for that there. Quick note I wanted to pass along, a good chunk of the United States is dealing with some very scary weather right now. So we wanted to make sure that if you knew about anything happening, obviously those folks, some are without power, so I truly doubt they are watching a C2C Care webinar today. But if you happen to know someone or you're in touch with someone who's having any kind of an emergency, There's a group called the National Heritage Responders. There's a 24-hour manned phone line they can go talk to get expert help when it comes to emergencies. The number is 202-661-8068. So if you're able to know of someone with an emergency, please pass that information along. Or if you're dealing with an emergency, give that phone call a number and you will be in touch with a human who will help you walk through any kind of the initial salvage procedures that you might have to deal with when it comes to an emergency. Quick reminder of the tech stuff that Mike said at the top. There is a chat box and there is a Q&A box. The chat is for chat. If you're having technical issues or you're having, just want to say hi to everyone, feel free to put it in there. If you have a Q&A or a question for one of our presenters today, put it in the Q&A box. It's easier for us to track them in the Q&A box. So please try to remember to put your questions within that box itself. Now I get to talk about our program for today. We are doing a fun thing called a labeling lightning round. You might see a bunch of great presenters for speaking or even on your screen right now. We asked for these folks to come up with brief videos, anywhere probably less than about 5 minutes, to talk about labeling objects. So today the plan is to show a video, have a Q&A with that person who created the video, so you can get an idea of any questions you might have on the labeling technique, and then we get to roll on to the next video and the presenter group. At the end, if we have some time left over, we will have a Q&A with everyone. So it should be a pretty good mix of multimedia format for us today at C2C Care. We're excited about it. The different types of videos that we're going to be watching today, we're going to be watching on how to label with written on an object in pencil, fabric tag sewn in, paper tag with string, B72 in ink, and paper label attached with an adhesive. So I'm going to stop sharing my presentation. Hopefully all of our presenters can pop their cameras on really quick and wave and say hello. Excellent. Thanks, everyone. And now we're going to go ahead and roll into our first video. So if everyone will bear with me really quick. Okay, so we're going to ask for all of our presenters to pop off their videos. I'm going to do it as well, and we are going to share this fabulous video. And again, this one is all about written on paper. It's created by Melissa Amundsen. She had recently joined the Midwest Art Conservation Center as the Assistant Preventive Conservator, and Maddie Cooper, who is a graduate fellow from the Winterthur, University of Delaware program in art conservation, but she's also spending her 3rd year as an intern at MACC. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and play their video of written on paper. Okay, so I'm going to see if Melissa and Maddie can join us on camera real quick. And while we're waiting for that, I'm using all the fun things on Zoom right now, so y'all have to excuse me as I bounce back and forth between things. I wanted to share a quick sheet that we put together for today, just so we can talk about it before people put in any questions or anything else they might be looking for. I had asked for our Maddie and also Melissa to go ahead and create a quick tips and tricks sheet, excuse me, and also the materials used. So Maddie and Melissa, let's go ahead and pop on. You can turn on your mics you like, and we can talk through the sheet a little bit while we wait for people to use or ask questions. So what kind of materials did you guys end up using for today's video?
So for writing on just high quality pencils and eraser, basically. We choose the sharpness based on the softness of the paper. So a softer pencil for a softer paper, because you don't want to make indentations.
Yeah, it's interesting because someone actually has in the Q&A box right now, they said, why shouldn't I use a mechanical pencil to label?
Just because it's got such a small profile and a risk of indenting the paper is a lot stronger.
Do you want to go ahead? We can talk a little bit about some tips and tricks that you guys put together as well, just in case you want to go through those. I do like how you guys really showed, especially with the Cheetos fingers, which I think is probably the most dangerous thing many of us have ever seen within an archive situation. Just starting with a tidy workspace and clean hands. Why don't you talk a little bit about how you should choose a consistent location to label pieces?
Yeah, I can talk about that. When you choose a consistent location as an institution, it reduces the amount of handling that researchers, users of these materials have to do. So if for works on paper, you're consistently labeling on the back in the lower right-hand corner, and everyone is made aware of that location, that there's less kind of handling and flipping the document over and over again to be able to see that accession number. Obviously, there's always exceptions to that. If there's damage or missing areas where you usually would label, then you're going to have to choose a different spot, but it can be really helpful to maintain consistency in the location.
It's interesting because someone did ask when they came to pencil itself, do you guys have a preferred brand they would use? Obviously, C2C Care can't endorse any particular pencil over another, but do you guys recommend a particular brand when it comes to it?
We didn't have a specific brand. We did use artist pencils. So artist grade graphite.
There's also a really good question just about treated papers. What would you recommend for any kind of paper that's been treated when it comes to labeling?
I guess it kind of depends on the treatment of the paper, if it can receive graphite or not. So if it can't receive graphite easily, it may not be the best method.
Okay. They are asking about slick surfaces too, a photographic print, for example. What would you recommend when you're dealing with something like that?
Yeah, that's kind of a similar answer. I mean, the HB and the 2B pencils are a little bit, the graphite is a little bit softer. So maybe try using an HB pencil just because that's the softer of the two options. And you might find that the sort of treated paper or glossy paper takes that media better. But if you're not having any luck with that, then I would explore other labeling options.
Okay. It's interesting because someone did mention, which it always comes up, wouldn't you be wearing gloves normally? So if you're trying to label things with a pencil, would you recommend gloves or would you recommend clean hands?
I guess it depends on preference a little bit. I find that dexterity can be really important with paper objects, and you do lose a little bit of that with gloves. So oftentimes we do recommend just using clean hands.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the glove thing is interesting because I know when I started graduate school, like, oh God, back in the mid O's, it was gloves, right? Like you did not show up without gloves. But I know that now we're kind of looking at it more as sometimes if your hands are clean, you're in a better situation, especially in dealing with this kind of an object yourself. There's also a question about what would happen if you're dealing with a piece of dark paper. What would you recommend being used in that case?
I'll go.
You go ahead, Melissa.
I guess it depends on if it shows up. We never have, or in this case, we didn't necessarily explore other colors of pencil because we do want the graphite because it's reversible. And I think the sheen on the graphite in certain types of matte black, more matte black would still show up. So I think it's a little bit material specific with that one.
Someone also asked, oh, could they ask if you could repeat the reason you shouldn't use mechanical pencil again, just real quick?
Yeah, sure. I think the graphite that they use for mechanical pencil can tend to be harder, and it's also small. It comes in these very small pieces of graphite, whereas if you're using an HB or a 2B pencil, the profile of the tip of the pencil is a little bit bigger. The graphite is a little bit softer, and so you have to use less pressure when applying that type of pencil. Whereas if you're using a mechanical pencil and you erase, you might see like sort of the ghost of where the accession number used to be because it's embossed into the paper.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Going back to the tips and trick sheets you guys put together for us, you have do not write on media or damaged areas, utilize a hard, stable writing surface, press firmly, but not hard enough to indent the paper, which you just discussed. Print clearly, which I think any of us who have dealt with historic documents always appreciate good penmanship when it comes to writing anything on there. And then also double check the numbers and erase with vinyl eraser if mistakes are made. So I think those are all really good tricks and tips. Just a quick reminder to our audience, I will make these, actually all these handouts are available on the Connecting to Collections website right now. Also, this entire webinar is being recorded. I should have mentioned that at the top of it. So you'll be able to view all these fabulous videos and the webinar itself at the end of it. I'm going to stop sharing the tips and tricks real quick, and I'm going to go back to my Q&A box because there's a couple of really good questions happening in here. If we can look at those real quick. What happens when your damage is in exactly the area you typically label a paper, like the upper or lower right-hand corners? What would be your second best option or third best option?
So you have to be flexible, I guess, as near as you could get to that as possible, I would say. Or if you have an alternative plan for those instances within your institution. But we don't really have any hard, fast rules for that.
Yeah, that makes sense. What surface do you recommend placing under the paper document when numbering? You guys have any recommendations?
I don't know. I mean, we set a hard surface. Anything that's soft and that has give, there's always a risk of sort of embossing into the paper. So just a hard tabletop surface.
For this video, we also had a piece of blotter paper under our piece. And I think, you know, as long as you're not pressing hard enough to cause any damage, it shouldn't be a problem to have that beneath it, as long as it's supported.
That makes sense. This is a super good question. What is the best place on a newspaper / magazine to write an accession number? I actually struggle with those types of media. Where do you guys tend to recommend?
That's a really good question. I would love to poll some archivists and see what they would have to say about that. I think in the case of a newspaper, just consistency and a place that minimizes handling. So depending on whether you're storing them flat or however you're storing your newspaper, making sure that they're labeled in the same place and that you don't have to flip through the entire newspaper to be able to see the accession number. That would be my recommendation. But again, I mean, that's a great question for people that deal with this a lot.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I know, you know, newspapers, it's hard because, I mean, some places obviously you'll exhibit the newspapers, but, you know, again, when I was learning, it was put them in a spot where you can find them, right? So it would be like on the front, but then and that was mainly when working behind the scenes, but as items came up more for exhibition, you realize how ugly that looks. Like you want the number there, but not like blatantly written up at the top. So it's a struggle. I think for our last question, we have one, which is, would you apply the same method for fabric backed paper items? We have what appears to be linen backed paper maps at our museums, which make the back more irregular in texture. Would pencil on the back still be the best method? What do you guys think?
I guess I don't really have an answer for that. If it receives it in a uniform enough way, I wouldn't see that it would be a huge problem, but if it would be difficult to reverse with erasing, I think then I would maybe consider a different method.
That makes
Yeah,
sense.
maybe do a little test area and see if you can erase it using that vinyl eraser.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, thank you, you guys. Your video was great. Hopefully we'll have time. There's more questions and we'll try to get to them at the end. We'll keep track of them. But for now, we're going to go ahead and roll into our next video. So you guys are more than welcome to turn your cameras off for a little bit. And thank you again. It was wonderful. And let's go ahead and jump into our next video. Okay, our next video is by Annabelle Camp, who is an NEH fellow at the Winterthur University of Delaware art program. This is fabric tag sewn in. So enjoy, and we'll see you in a few minutes.
Hello, I'm Annabelle Camp, and I will be demonstrating how to create fabric labels for textile collections. So I have everything you should need out here, minus a sink and an ironing board. So I have cotton twill tape. This is 1/4 inch cotton twill tape. And then this is just a substrate to write on. This is a 1/4 millimeter micron pen. It has a fine tip for creating nice legible numbers or letters. I have an iron for heat setting my ink, as well as a 1% solution of Orbis WA paste, which will be used for cleaning the labels. And that can be purchased at an outdoor supply store, such as Tractor Supply. Here I have hair silk. It's a nice fine silk that shouldn't put any unnecessary weight or stress on your collection textile. A needle, and then just fabric scissors for the twill tape and thread scissors. So when you have all of this supplies, you can start, as the list says, with writing out your numbers. And typically you might want to do this in large batches where you can just write out multiple numbers, then move on to your heat setting, washing, etc. The most difficult part of this process is making sure you have good tension so that you have a nice crisp line in your numbers. You can do this in multiple ways. You could just wrap it around and pin it. You could wrap it around multiple times. Or what I like to do is just use my fingers to create really good tension and then write the numbers in. If you are writing multiple labels at a time, just make sure that you have enough space in between each number so that you can create little fold overs of the ends. These fold overs are really essential. They create a nice clean label, and they also prevent unraveling of that twill tape. So once you have your numbers written, you're going to heat set them using an iron on your cotton setting for about a minute, just to make sure that none of the ink is going to wash off in case of a water event. Then you just want to rinse your twill tape in an Orbis solution. Make sure that the twill tape gets fully saturated and that you rinse all of the Orbis out completely. You don't want any bubbles or any smell remaining. Once it's rinsed, obviously it's going to be wet, so you need to dry it. You can either blot it dry, or I like to use the iron. And that's really great because you get it nice and flat and everything's straight. And also when the label is damp, you can go ahead and cut these, and when it's damp and warm, you can just create those little folds with your fingers. It's much easier to create the crease that way, I've found, than trying to go in and create it with an iron. So once you have your labels and they have their little fold overs, you can begin sewing on the collection textile. Obviously, if you're working with a collection textile, you want to make sure that all of this is far away from that piece. However, today I'm demonstrating on a study collection piece, so I'm not quite as worried. So these are two ways that you can attach your textile label to your piece. And what's really important when you go to label a textile is that you think systematically about the placement of that label, just like any other object. Some people might put it on the edge, they might put it on a specific corner. If it's a costume, you might put it in the collar, etc. I would speak with your collections care team and any curators to make sure that there's a systematic way of labeling things so that people can find the number easily without a lot of unnecessary handling. So these are two ways that a label could be attached. In this way, it's only attached on one side, as you see here. So on this end, I just tacked down that loose end using cotton. I don't need the hair silk here, save a little money. And just use cotton because it's not going into the collection textile. And then the hair silk can be used around all 3 sides at this end to make sure that it's secure. And this is really nice. I actually prefer this because you can have this hanging out in storage so that it's more easy to find. But on display, you can simply tuck it behind so you don't have to see it. This method, I think, is probably more common, and this utilizes hair silk whip stitches around all 4 edges. And in this example, I've used blue hair silk. In a real example, I'd probably use white, but I just wanted it to be a little bit more visible here. So I just backstitch within the twill tape here, and then stitch around all 4 sides into the collection textile. When you're stitching your label on, you want to make sure that 1, you're not using any knots on the collection textile, as that can cause to stress and breakage in that area. And you also want to make sure that your stitches are going in between the individual threads of the textile as opposed to penetrating them, as that can lead to breakage. Otherwise, if you have any questions about labeling textiles, I look forward to talking to you at the webinar. Thank you.
Okay, Annabelle, if you want to pop on your camera real quick and say hi to everyone.
Hello.
Okay, great. So let's go ahead and share your tips and tricks on screen. As I was saying, and I put it in the chat box just so everyone knows, I put a link to the website where we've loaded up all these tips and tricks. So if you want to just go grab the PDF there, you are more than welcome to. It might be a little bit easier to view than on the screen itself. So would you mind going over some of the fabrics, the actual materials that you use during your webinar?
Of course. Yeah, I think that most people think there might be fewer supplies necessary, but it's actually, I think, a fairly lengthy list, especially compared to the pencil on paper. So I typically use cotton twill tape. That's pretty widely accepted for the labeling of most textiles, and a Micron archival ink pen. Again, like I showed in the video, you can get those in different sizes. I've kind of played around and decided on the one that I like, that I can create legible numbers with, which is obviously very important. Hair silk is great because it's really fine for sewing onto the textile, but if you don't have access to that, cotton thread is also acceptable. Needles, of course, and board or paper just to write on. You want to be careful. Your ink will bleed through that twill tape. And then conservation grade surfactant like Orvis paste, which is commercially available. You can buy it probably on Amazon. And then an ironing board.
Excellent. And do you want to go ahead and review a couple of the tips and tricks that you put on there as well?
Of course, yeah. Like with the paper, or any label, you want to be really clear. And I think it's very difficult to do that when you're writing on a textile. So it does take practice to get a clear number on that twill tape. You also want to be, again, consistent with the location of your label. A lot of people might decide to do it in a corner, very similar to a paper object if it's a flat textile, but with costume, it might get a little bit tricky. And it's just really important to have those guidelines set up within your collection so that people don't have to root around trying to find an object's number. Also, it's really important to avoid using knots, like I mentioned in the video. That's sort of a textile conservation motto. It can just lead to stress in that area and eventual damage. And also, I should say that if you are looking for more guidance on the actual stitching techniques, there are resources available in the Textile Specialty Group Wiki with diagrams that show how to do a back stitch instead of starting with a knot. And then, of course, try to avoid penetrating the threads of the textile. Sometimes it might be impossible, but if you can avoid it at all costs, it would be best.
Excellent, thank you. So I'm gonna go ahead and flip back so that we can just talk, and we'll start looking and see if we have any Q&A from our audience today. One question is just, where do you buy hair silk? Where would you recommend?
I know Talus, you can buy it from Talus or other conservation suppliers. I will say it is expensive though, and again, because of that, I think cotton might be a better option for some people with limited budgets.
This is an interesting one. Is what's the consensus on using soft wrap Tyvek for labels rather than twill tape for textiles? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I've seen both, and I don't know of a consensus, to be honest. It might just be what's available or what you find easier. I personally think that the the twill tape will look nicer longer. I think Tyvek tends to get sort of that wrinkly appearance, but it'll still do the job.
Someone's asking, would you pre-wash the twill tape with Orvis, or is the washing process done specifically to remove any extra ink from the pen?
It's a bit of both, and I think you don't need to add an extra step in there. Washing once after doing the pen will do both.
Someone asked also, just what is the purpose of the Orvis WA paste?
That is, like I mentioned in the last question, to help get rid of any extra ink that might still be soluble even after the heat setting. And also, if there's hand oils or something on the twill tape, it'll help remove those.
Perfect. Someone asked if you could repeat the name of the wiki you just mentioned.
Yes, I can actually put a link in the chat too, but it's the Textile Specialty Group wiki. And they have an excellent handbook, I would say, of hand stitches for conservation.
Oh, this is a good question because I've run into this. Any suggestions for silk garments with unfinished, damaged, frayed hems? I find it's often tricky to find a place for the label, as silk is so fragile.
Definitely. So there are some methods. If a textile can't be sewn on at all, you will have to look at different methods. There are some adhesive labeling methods for textiles. But if the hem or maybe a typical place where you would label is not safe, I'd look at other areas. Like the neckline is often fairly reinforced, so it might be a good place to add a label there.
Great. We've been using archival permanent pen, but not heat setting. Why is the heat setting necessary?
The heat setting is necessary because those pens can be water soluble, and it's not that they'll run completely, but I have had them run where I forgot to heat set it and then I went to wash it and it just, it became a little blurry. You could still read it, but obviously I wouldn't want a water event to happen and have the ink bleed onto the textile itself. So that prevents that.
Perfect. Someone's asking kind of generically, what is hair silk? And then someone also asked a question related to, can you use regular silk thread instead of hair silk? So could you kind of answer both of those?
Sure. Yeah, so hair silk is just an incredibly fine silk thread. It's about as fine as hair, hence the name. And I see no problem with using silk thread. I think that as opposed to hair silk. However, I think if you don't want to use hair silk, I would just use cotton thread. I think it ages better than a silk thread, and it's probably cheaper.
Oh, this is interesting. It says, do you need a dedicated iron to do the job? Do you need to clean the iron regularly?
I typically iron the labels between a piece of muslin or just plain cotton fabric. That way, if there is any bleed or imprinting from the ink, it comes onto that piece of muslin, and I reuse that muslin. But then you're not worried about ink coming onto your iron. That's a really good question.
Yeah, I do that at home. With certain things I iron, because I have irons that like randomly spit out like rust, like old water and stuff. So I tend to just do that. So when I ever iron things in the pre-COVID days when there was a purpose of ironing things. How long should I keep the iron on the fabric to set?
I do it for about 1 minute to 2 minutes. I know some other ink.
We'll see if her Wi-Fi pops back on. It should in a second.
Inks might have run.
Perfect.
Hello.
Yeah, can you hear us?
Yes, I apologize if I cut out.
Okay, it's the world we live in. It happens. Crocheted items, how do you mark them? How do you deal with that kind of an object?
That's a really good question. You can use the same labeling system, but again, you just want to make sure you're not going through a yarn, but maybe just looping loosely around the loop within the crochet. It might be that you don't stitch around all 4 sides. You might just do it on 2 ends. You can be flexible with that as long as it's secure, but not so tight that it's restricting the textile.
It looks like some people in the chat are kind of recommending some items as well. So if you guys want to take a look at that, feel free. It looks like it's all good information coming through there. Do you recommend a curved needle or a straight needle for the attachment of the label?
It's entirely personal preference, and it might depend on the textile and your access as well.
Ooh, this is the question, which I'll get your opinion as well, but it says, are Sharpies okay, or does it have to be a micron pen? What would you recommend?
I don't have any data to say Sharpies are not okay, but microns are advertised as archival. They have been sort of tested and withstood the test of time. So I would go with those if you can. I also think you're going to be able to get a finer point. Microns are made with much finer points than Sharpies, so it's just going to make everything easier.
Yeah. Someone just said in the chat too that Sharpies have a tendency to fade.
Great.
So that's something to keep in mind as well. Okay, so let's look at one more question. Oh, how about this one? Can you talk about the benefits of doing whip stitch around all 4 sides? I've also seen recommendations to do minimal stitches to tack down only label corners, for example.
Definitely. I think it depends on maybe how much an object will be handled. If you only stitch down on 2 sides, for example, you're then basically creating a loop that might snag. So that is a risk, where if you do all 4 sides, you're preventing that. You can, the amount of stitching or the spacing of your stitching is really dependent upon you and what the textile can take. If it is a really fragile textile, but you think it can withstand labeling, I would definitely cut down on the number of stitches you're putting into it.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. That video was great. Hopefully we'll have time to answer some more questions at the end, but our 10 minutes is up. So we got to roll on to the next video. So thanks, Annabelle. So our next video is going to be Paper Tag with String. It's by Rain Poisson. After graduating with a Bachelor of Fine Arts degree from the University of Saskatchewan, Rain pursued a career in heritage and graduated with a postgraduate diploma in cultural heritage conservation, and she currently works up in the Saskatchewan area. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off my camera. We're going to share her video, and then we'll pop back in a few minutes.
Hello and welcome! My name is Rain and I'll be showing you how to label objects with a paper tag and string. So one of the first things you'll need to do is to wear some protective gloves like the nitrile ones I am wearing to protect you and the object. To write on your tag with, you could use a Micron ink waterproof archival pen. It has a nice small nib and it is very clear and concise to write with. You can also just use a pencil if that's what you prefer, like the 2HB one I have. Or whatever pencil, I'm not going to rag on you for that. You may also want some tweezers if getting the tag on may prove a little difficult, especially if you're wearing gloves. Importantly, we'll want an archival non-yellowing paper tag to write with. Yoink! If the tags you bought don't come with string or you need more to tie on an object with, get some 100% cotton string or something like cotton twill tape will do. Alright, we got our supplies, so let's get to tagging some objects. Before we dive real deep into this topic, I just have to put it out there, we want to write clearly and concisely on our label, put the object accession number or ID on there, because we can't find the object's information if we can't read it, folks. Make sense? Other things to note are not to write too big and messy on your label. Likewise, not to write too small. Is this labeling for ants, folks? Psh! So, we have our tags prepared and ready to go. I like to lay them out to make sure I haven't repeated any numbers or made mistakes. So, let's get into it. The first object I'll apply a paper tag to is this copper and brass metal object that comes in 2 pieces. I'm going to apply a tag to the top and the bottom. So I'll do the bottom first. I'm going to put down some cushioning so my object is not rolling around while I'm trying to put the tag on. And on my tag you'll notice I have the object accessioned number and the object name, which in this case is just base. You'll want to use your institution's actual object name, not just the made up name I put on for mine. I'm going to loop it securely on the leg there. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy. Nothing too intense there, folks. We'll move on to the lid. Alright, here's the next piece, the lid. I want to make sure on it that the pieces aren't loose or damaged in any way before I put my tag on there. I have my prepared tag with the accession number and object name, which in this case is a made-up one labeled lid. and I'm just going to loop it around there. You don't even have to tie it, just loop it. And there we go, perfect. So with our pieces, the tags may seem overkill and the object may already have permanent labeling, but the tags allow you to find the object information without handling it and acts as contingency in case the parts are separated. Next, we have these small embroidery scissors here that aren't appropriate for permanent labeling because they are too small and difficult to write on. These are good options for using a paper tag with. Again, I'm applying the label on a sturdy area of the embroidery scissors around the hole there, and I'm just going to loop it through. Don't even have to tie it, just loop it. There you go, perfect, easy peasy. Oh, heavy. So this guy is a perfect option for a paper tag because although it has a permanent label on the bottom, this guy is surprisingly heavy and I want to reduce handling because he's also ceramic and has a sensitive outer layer that can be rubbed off. So I'm applying the tag in an easy to find location so that this guy won't be handled a lot or accidentally dropped if someone's looking for the label. Overall, tags are a great option. They're very user-friendly and the pieces you need are pretty easy to find. But one major drawback is they can be damaged very easily. They can rip, they can tear, they can fall off. And if a tag is the only option you have for an object's ID, like these scissors here, that can be a problem because then that object information is lost. Knowing the drawbacks, paper tags are still a great, easy option to use, especially for objects where a more robust label isn't appropriate, such as basketry. It's better to tie on a label than risk damaging the object due to its porosity and sensitivity, which could make even penciling in the label difficult.
Hey, Rain, why don't you come on camera real quick?
Hello.
No, great job. Yeah, that's I think everyone's first way to label anything is just putting those little paper tags on there.
Yeah.
So let me go ahead and just pull up your tips and tricks. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the materials that you use for paper string. Do you mind going over those for me real quick?
For sure. So you'll want the very first thing, like an acid-free archival paper tag. Like you can get those from any museum conservation resource like Tallis or Carmaclean here in Canada. You may be able to source them even locally. You just have to make sure that they're actually archival and not that they just say they're archival when really they're not. You just have to check the material on them. Some cotton string, preferably like a 100% cotton string, not mercanized cotton string or anything with additives in it. And either a micron archival pen or like a pencil, 2HB pencil, like they mentioned in the earlier video. And I've seen both too used on tags as well. I usually prefer the micron archival pen because it's just nicer to write with. It's stays very clear, and sometimes I find that pencil can rub off or potentially fade over time depending on where the tag is and things like that. Also some nitrile gloves, but mentioned earlier, especially if you're working on a material that you really need your dexterity for, so long as you have clean hands, that's also okay. And scissors for cutting your string and tweezers if you are wearing gloves and you need a little more dexterity.
Perfect. I did like how on your tips and tricks, which we'll move on to those, that you talk about how rounding your corners on your tags, which is something that I learned later on when I was tagging things. So why don't we go through some of those and talk about some of those tips and tricks that you have to find out?
Yeah, absolutely. So unless you have tags like mine where they're already rounded, you can easily just give them a little snip because that way they're not going to poke your object or get caught or snag on anything on your object. Say especially if you're applying a secondary tag, say to a textile, just to reduce handling. You don't want the pokey end of the tag like pulling out some of the textile by accident or anything like that. We don't like pokey things around our objects is the main thing.
A good rule of thumb.
Yeah. Or if you can't, just get the convenient labels. My second tip is you can absolutely make your own labels by getting some acid-free archival paper and just cutting them to the shape you need and making sure that you still round the corners, you hole punch them, and you're good to go. And that way you can customize your tag size if you really want to as well. My third tip is to avoid tags with, say, the metal rivets in them. Even though technically they're, say, a little stronger, they can also rust though, which can affect your object and just molly up your tag as well. And let's see. Oh yeah, my fourth tip, a pencil mark is much easier to remove from an object than a pen mark. This is where your option of using a micron pen or a pencil while you're tagging is up to you. I've definitely found even coworkers, they have all these tags and stuff on their desk and they have their coffee out and they drop their micron pen like near an object and it's just like, no, just clean up your workspace. If you're using a pen while tagging, just make sure you're not doing it close to your objects in case you drop it. Absolutely. I have seen that happen, unfortunately. And then my last tip is put the tag in an easy to see spot, especially with tags. A lot of the time they're used when there's already a permanent label on the object. So you'll want to make it easy and convenient to find the label. There it is, done. You're not fiddling around with your object trying to find it. Even if it takes more than one, especially with some larger objects in storage. I've worked with a lot of agricultural objects, and even though they have permanent tags, when it's a giant piece of machinery, it's okay to have a couple tags on there just for convenience to figure out the number.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I know, and I'll top this off just so we can talk a little bit more, that like I've used it where maybe, you know, especially if you have a large amount of objects come in, sometimes the paper tags are almost a temporary tag for a little bit. And so you can get around to putting more semi-permanent way of tagging the objects as well. So that's another way to look at them as you're doing it. So we do have some questions floating around in here. It seems like everyone has kind of a universal hatred for the metal grommet tags. So we will note that when we are looking at things. We don't like those at all. Someone had asked about maybe using Tyvek tags as an option. Have you ever used Tyvek as for when tagging things?
Oh, I haven't used Tyvek, but I don't see why it wouldn't work. Absolutely. Yep. If you got it, use it.
Someone else is also about how you can print the number on the archival paper and apply it versus a tag. Have you ever had any experience when it comes to printing the tags as compared to handwriting them, or have you primarily handwritten tags?
I've primarily handwritten, but I have heard of other institutions printing them, and it's a totally viable way of doing it, especially if you have a large amount of tagging you have to do. Like if you can print them and just cut out your tags that way, awesome. Reduces time.
Exactly. Someone also kind of started to ask about the information that you actually put on the tags. They said, should you add location information to the tag or simply the object ID and object name? I'd like to get your thoughts on that. I think it kind of depends on the space you have on your tag.
Definitely the space you have on your tag. Generally, I absolutely make sure you have the accession number on there. And if there's space, the object name, I definitely find when I'm looking for objects in storage, I go by the name usually because that's just how my brain works. And it might depend on your institution as well. So it depends. I like having both just in case, if there's space and it's written clearly. I like how everyone so far has put, please write clearly and concisely.
Exactly. That's like, I have my actual handwriting, and then I have like my tag handwriting. Like, yeah, it's much neater. Exactly. And I take my time with a little bit more.
Oh, and I forgot to say in the video, but I write on both sides of my tag usually. It was one of those things where once I saw it, I was like, oh, I forgot to do that. But that's what I do. Because then again, you're just not fiddling around with your tag. And if for some reason one side gets damaged, then the other side is fine.
Yeah, someone mentioned that in the chat. So thank you for bringing that up, because I meant to mention
Oh, good job, chat. Whoever that was.
Yeah, exactly. People are asking about when you put an item on exhibit, what do you do with the paper tag? I have seen it both ways, where in case it's something like a, if it's like an urn or something, like a vessel, sometimes you can get away with checking the tag in the vessel and it doesn't take away from the object. It kind of depends. What has been your experience with it?
Yeah, definitely depends on the object. Usually I've been able to hide it. You just kind of hide it in a crevice, or if you have to take it off. But I've also taken off the tag, but then hid it under its mount, just to make sure that information is somewhere, especially if the object doesn't have a permanent label on it.
Yep, that makes sense. Do you let the ink dry on the tag for a certain amount of time before applying? Yes. At least I do, for sure.
Yeah,
oh, go ahead.
Oh, like I usually do like 5 to 10 minutes. It doesn't take long, definitely, but I always just make sure it's absolutely dry.
Yeah, I have the curse of the left-handedness too, so I'm always really careful when I do it to make sure that I don't smear my ink.
Yeah,
that's the other test too. This is interesting. Would it be acceptable to type a label on a small adhesive label and stick that onto a paper tag instead of having to handwrite onto it?
Oh,
so
I feel like I'm not sure. I feel like the self-adhesive labels are usually evil and they fall off eventually, is the thing. They're generally not made to withstand long periods of sticking, really. So I wouldn't trust it. Yeah, unless it's like specifically a super fancy archival sort of sticky label, but my gut instinct is to not trust it.
Yeah, a couple people are saying that basically that self-adhesive labels will tend to fall off and also do weird things chemically. And I think that's the last thing we want to ever hear near our objects, is when things do weird things chemically. Someone also said printing out numbers on archival paper has not fallen out of favor, is an easy method. Perhaps someone can confirm about archival inks. That's a good question. And I think that's maybe some research we need to do, because I know that's come into question before. Could you possibly use, okay, so when we were talking about kind of the hole reinforcements, someone was asking about the hole punch reinforcements, like the little round circle guys. Again, I'd just be worried about the adhesive on them personally, but that's just me.
Yeah, I feel like once there's adhesive in there, it kind of defeats the purpose of the archival tag then. I know some archival labels you can get, say from Talus, have a reinforced like stiffer paper around the hole. So those are available and are an option too. They might be a little more expensive, but
again, depends on your budget, I think, for some of these projects.
Depends on the budget.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much. 10 minutes is up, so we got to move on to our next one, unfortunately, but we'll see you again at the end. Okay, thanks, Rain. Appreciate it. Okay, so we're going to move on to traditional B72 and ink. This is done by Ronnie Ben-Ami. She graduated this year with a master's degree in the conservation of archaeological and museum objects from Durham University in the UK. And they now work as an objects conservator at the Tel Aviv Museum of Art. So I'm going to go ahead and start that video, and we'll see you guys in just a few minutes.
Hi, I'm Ronnie Ben-Ami, and I'm going to show you how to do the paraloid B72 labeling method. B72 is a thermoplastic resin with excellent aging characteristics, and it's highly reversible, so it's preferable over using something like lacquer or a cellulose nitrate-based varnish, which can yellow over time and flake off, resulting in the loss of primary information. This is ideal for non-porous objects such as metal, glass, ceramic, and stone. So these are the materials I'll be working with. I have reagent grade acetone. I have
Paraloid B72 30% concentration in acetone. I have golden high flow acrylic in carbon black. I've put some of that in this small bowl. I've decanted some Paraloid B72 into this beaker and some acetone into this beaker, which I'll use for cleaning the brush and in case I need to do any cleanup. I've got a small brush for applying the B72, a really teeny brush for applying the catalog number, and I also have this white Posca pen, which I'm going to be using for darker colored surfaces. It's an acrylic-based pen, and also a cotton swab in case of cleanup. I'm using extraction because I'm working with solvents. So to demonstrate, I'm going to label a dark and a light glazed ceramic. I'm going to start out with this light glazed plate. Before applying the B72, be sure to spot check with a cotton swab moistened with acetone to make sure there's no interaction with the surface. This is especially important for painted, varnished, or otherwise treated surfaces. I've selected an unobtrusive location to label on the underside of the ceramic plate. I've made sure I'm working on a clean surface by brushing it free of dust and degreasing it with acetone. And now that everything is ready, I'm going to apply the B72. In one stroke that's just big enough to fit the catalog number. On the other side, and get all the B72 off. I'll wait for it to dry for about 20 minutes and then apply a second layer the same way. 2 layers should be enough for a smooth surface like this, but more porous surfaces may require thicker applications to prevent absorption of the ink and consequent disfigurement of the object. After applying the second layer, let the B72 dry for about half an hour, and then you can write your catalog number on it. So I've already created a swatch for me to do that over here. It's a little hard to see, so that we don't have to wait. I'm using this tiny little brush, and you do have to have a pretty steady hand for it. So I'm just going to write the date as the catalog number. I can clean that off with a little bit of acetone. After the ink is completely dried, which I have over here, you can put a top coat of the B72 on, which will prevent the number from wearing away, especially if it's going to endure a lot of handling. So that's what I'm going to do. And that is your label. I'm going to do the same thing on a darker colored ceramic. So starting out again by putting a swatch of the B72 down. And on the other side. And wait for that to dry for about 20 minutes. Apply a second layer, let that dry as well. And now I can write my label, and I'm going to use this white Posca pen. When that ink is fully dry, then I can do my final top layer. And I'm all done. So before you apply this to an object, practice the labeling method until you feel confident. All right, thanks to Connecting to Collections Care for having me, and thanks for watching.
Great, thanks, Ronnie. You can go ahead and turn on your camera. There you go. Hey, how you doing?
Good, how are you?
Good. Thanks for putting together that video. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and start by taking a quick look at this tips and tick sheet. Like I said, I just shared it again down in the chat. So if you guys want to go ahead and download PDF copies, please feel free. But why don't you do just a quick review of some of the materials that you used in your video?
A quick review of the materials?
Yes, that'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. So I used an acrylic-based paint pen, and it was about 0.7 millimeters or smaller if you can find it, and it was in titanium white. Those are also available in black if you want. When buying a paint pen, just make sure you're not buying an oil-based paint pen, because if you ever want to try to remove that, you're going to find that the B72 dissolves a lot faster than the paint pen, and can stain your object. For black, I use the golden high flow acrylic paint. It's a really high quality acrylic paint. That's the consistency of ink. For writing the actual number, I used a 0.00000 point round brush. But you can, depending on the size of the object, you can go a little bigger. Just make sure it's a really fine brush. I used a flat brush. I think it was a size 2 that measures just over the width of the catalog number. I used Paraloid B72 20% to 30% weight by volume in reagent grade acetone. I made that up in the lab, but they do sell kits for labeling with B72 that some of them come with also a white B72 that has titanium white pigment powder mixed into it for dark surfaces. If you are mixing it up in the lab, if you decide to get the pellet form of B72 and do that, make sure you're not mixing with amyl acetate, which is sometimes called acetone. It's also called nail polish remover. That's something completely different. And finally, I used acetone for cleaning my brush and for any cleanup. I can talk about some additional options for materials. A popular one is a road ring pen with a pigment-based ink. This is a bit of more expensive option, but it's a good investment. Winsor & Newton make a really good permanent black ink and white inks. Dr. Martens makes a white proof ink that would be excellent for a dark surface. I mentioned the Paraloid B72 with titanium white. Some people like to use crow quill pens for dipping into the ink for labeling. You can do this. I personally don't like it because I find it has a chance of cutting through the layer of B72 and potentially scratching the surface or staining it by bleeding through. So you just want to be really careful if you do decide to go this route because the pen nibs are made out of metal.
Yeah.
And finally, there are other options for the actual material that you use for the label. You can use Paraloid B67, which can be dissolved in white spirit if your object is sensitive to acetone. This can be used as a bottom or a top coat. I also like using B72 as a bottom coat and then using a top coat of Paraloid B67 because it has less chance of interacting with whatever ink I am or redissolving the acetone underneath.
I like how in your tips and tricks, well, sorry, I got to the wrong one. I'll stop sharing it, but your tips and tricks, I like your one was basically like have patience, which is always my thing is like always like once I start numbering, I'm like, oh, I'm gonna go on the next step. And sometimes you have to like go take a walk, like let stuff dry. So it's always a good reminder of just let stuff chill out. It's a little bit. Let it go. Well, let's go ahead and take some questions because it looks like people are questioning away in here. Someone has some B72 bottles come with a brush. Do you recommend to always use a specialized brush instead?
I don't know. It depends on what brush they come with. I just like to use a nice soft brush with a flat top, just because it's gonna give you a smooth surface if it's a soft brush. If it's a harder bristle brush, you're gonna have more of a bumpy surface. So the number that you write might end up a little harder to read.
Not like that. If the B72 is bubbling as it dries, is that a product of the application method or too much stirring when dissolving the pellet?
Yeah, you might need to, like, after you've made it up, hit it on the table a few times, get all the bubbles up to the surface, let it rest for a little while, and put it, have like a surface that you can mar up with applications that like like a metal sheet, and test it out on that surface and see if it bubbles up or if you need to let it rest a little longer.
Yeah, that's the other thing I really like what you said in your tips and tricks is just like to practice. Like, and I've done that, like where you just go get like a coffee cup and you just like practice labeling because it's hard. It's a talent.
I know, you think it's straightforward, but it ends up, you come up against problems you didn't think you would.
Exactly. So yeah, I have random stuff around my house which is labeled, which I find very funny. My kids will be like, "What's this?" And I'm like, "Don't worry about it." I'm like, it's something that was used in a workshop at some point. Can you use micron pens on B72? A couple people kind of asked that question.
Probably not. In my experience, no. Usually when you apply the top coat, the acetone in the B72 will just wipe it clean, wipe it right off.
Mm-hmm.
The inks, and the reason that I use acrylic and permanent inks is because the permanent inks have shellac mixed into them, which allows them to set and and so once they're dry, they're not water soluble and they're less reagent soluble. They will ultimately be soluble if you rub them with acetone. So of course, because of course you want your label to be reversible, but you want a one sweep to not, completely ruin all your work.
Yeah. This one's interesting. When labeling education collections exposed to lots of touching, would either B72 or B67 be up to the task? What are your thoughts?
I think B67 is actually significantly harder than B72. I think by a good margin. So I might recommend B67. But if you only have B72, just do a couple extra layers, so it takes longer to rub off.
Yeah, exactly. Well, there are more questions, but we got to roll on to the next video to make sure we have time. There's one question especially that I want to get to, so remind me, which is about people using quick drying clear nail polish. So keep that in mind. Keep that in mind. We'll come back to that at the end. So Bonnie's already saying like no, but we'll talk a little bit more about what some of us have seen at the end. So thanks, and we'll see you in a little bit. Thanks so much for your video. Okay, and our final video today is going to be paper label attached with adhesive. It's by Gina Watkinson, who's the Conservation Lab Manager for the Preservation Division at the Arizona State Museum at the University of Arizona. So we're going to play that video, and then I will see you guys at the end of it.
Hi, my name is Gina Watkinson. I'm the Conservation Lab Manager at the Arizona State Museum at the University of Arizona, and I would like to share with you our method for object labeling. The procedures for this method are also available in the Human Remains Guide for museum and academic institutions. First, let's gather the tools we will need. A ruler. I like to use a clear plastic ruler, rounded flat tweezers, scissors, a sharp X-Acto knife, bamboo skewer or toothpicks, cotton swabs, acid-free paper, laser printer, distilled warm water, paper towels, and last but not least, Rollplex B60A. Rollex B68 is a low viscosity acrylic emulsion, and it is available from Conservation Resources. We use nail polish bottles to hold small quantities of the Rollex B68. The brushes are handy, and the small bottles prevent the Rollex from drying out. You can buy empty nail polish bottles on Amazon or from your local nail supply store. The best way to fill the nail polish bottles is with a small funnel. To create the paper labels, type the object numbers in either Century Gothic or Arial type font in bold. I like to type the numbers out in several sizes so I can determine what fits best on the object. The font size depends on the size of the item and the surface available for label placement. I tend to use font sizes 8, 6, and 4 on most objects. If a small font size is hard to read, you can space out the numbers to make it more legible. To do this in Microsoft Word, highlight the number and right-click, then select Font. In the Font window, select Expanded in Spacing or enter a value after By. Hit OK to confirm the settings. Now print out your labels using a laser printer. To separate the numbers, carefully cut the paper with a ruler and X-Acto knife. The clear ruler helps with lining the X-Acto just below the numbers without cutting any of the print off. After the number is cut away from the paper, round the corners with scissors. This will prevent lifting of the label. Now that your label is cut out, let's adhere it to the object. First, place your object on a clean surface and use bean bags or foam to safely support your object if needed. I also recommend checking to make sure that there isn't any dust or debris on the surface of your object before applying the label. Make sure you have all your tools ready. I like to have everything I need on a tray next to me. Loosen the cap of the Rollex B68. Use the tweezers to pick up the label and decide where you want to put it on the object. On the back side of the label, brush on a light coat of the Rollex. Now carefully place the label onto the object. Use a cotton swab or bamboo stick to push the paper label into place. Wait until the label is secured to the surface and then brush on a top coat to protect the paper label from abrasion and lifting. Make sure to cover the entire paper label and the label edges. Resist the urge to use your finger to remove any excess Rollex. If there is any pooling, use a cotton swab to absorb it. In the event that you need to remove a label from an object, first apply a small amount of distilled warm water with a cotton swab to the top surface of the label. Let the water absorb into the label to soften the Rollex. Next, use a bamboo skewer to gently lift one corner of the label. The label should be soft and easily lift. Use a wet cotton swab to remove the adhesive under the label and help roll the label away from the surface. Re-wet the top of the label as needed. Use a pair of tweezers to assist with rolling the label back. Do not pull the label upwards or too quickly. This may result in surface loss. Use a damp cotton swab to remove any excess roll plaques remaining on the surface of the object. Thank you for your attention, and I hope you learned something new. Please feel free to get in touch with me if you have any questions. Happy labeling!
Great, thanks, Gina. Feel free to pop on your camera. Hi.
Hey!
All right, I'm gonna go ahead and share your tip sheet that you helped us put together. Together. Why don't you go ahead and just run really quick through the materials used and maybe pick your favorite tip out of that list, because we already have questions.
Yeah, so sure, yeah. So we usually use a ruler and some scissors. I mentioned that I really like a clear ruler when you're cutting out those paper labels. You don't really have to use a ruler and X-Acto knife. That's just me being excessive. You can actually just cut them out with the scissors if you want. We use a tweezer. I like to use the flat sort of rounded tweezers, but the inside not having those sort of ridges on them. I always have cotton swabs and bamboo skewers available. Obviously the Rollplex B60A and the nail polish bottles. We use a laser printer. That's one of the things you just want to make sure that you have a laser printer and not a daisy or a dot matrix printer, which are sort of older type printers. And then we use acid-free paper. So most photocopy paper is acid-free paper. And then for removing the labeling, you may want to have some warm distilled or deionized water around with you just in case you make mistakes. And we always have either Kim wipes or paper towels just in case there's a spill. And of course, object supports. You should always have that when you're working on objects.
Perfect.
And, oh, sorry.
No, that's fine. Go right ahead.
So I did want to say, so we've used this technique was created here at the Arizona State Museum over 20 years ago. So we've been using this technique we've been using this technique for over 20 years. So even pre me actually working here. And we really like it because it's very user friendly. It's very easy to use. If you have, we have volunteers actually do a lot of our labeling. And I know that, so not only do we use this for labeling our objects directly, but we do actually label our tags with this method.
No, nice.
And we also do label plastic boxes with this method. It works really well. So this is a polystyrene box that we can use that with. So yeah, so we use this method for objects, for labeling tags and boxes. So it's really, we do really enjoy this technique, and it's Dr. Nancy Odegaard who ran the lab for over 30 years. She actually taught this technique to, she went and taught this technique in Afghanistan and Iraq and in South America. So it's very user friendly, and most of the supplies are very easy to get.
Excellent. Yeah, and you did a great, your tips and tricks are great, and you also put some really good resources on the handout. So thank you for doing that. And like I said, these are all available on the website, ready to download. So if you can't catch them here, if the view's a little blurry, or feel free to download them there. So let's go ahead and jump over to some of the Q&A that's popping up. So someone has, so an inkjet printer is not okay. So do you they said so an inkjet printer is not okay.
No, has to be a laser jet.
Yeah, I've heard that as well. And I think that's literally just because the ink can kind of run, can it? It doesn't.
Yeah, it doesn't fuse to the paper in the same way the laser jet would.
Yeah, exactly. So someone was saying, what do you prefer for labeling your Southwest pottery? Paper labels or B72 as in the previous presentation? Which would you?
We use the paper labels for ceramics. We use the paper labels for ceramics, metals, plastic, basketry. We don't use it directly for textiles, obviously, but most materials it's going to work really well for, especially ceramics. Actually, it works really well for our ceramic collection.
And the B72 method is totally fine. I think it's literally just if you have access to the inkjet, or I'm sorry, the laser jet, and then, those kind of materials, try that version. See what works best for your institution.
Yeah, people do, other museums will use the same printing technique with B72. The reason why we don't use it or why we don't teach it that method is because of the acetone might be, you have to, it has solvent fumes, so you have to be a little more careful. It's flammable, you have to store it properly. So it's not as user-friendly, the B72 necessarily, especially because we work in Arizona, we work with a lot of cultural centers and we work with a lot of CRM firms, and that's not necessarily easy for them to do.
Right. Someone asked, have you ever used rice paper for paper labels?
So originally they did use Japanese paper. They did try that out, but because I know that it ends up the paper itself looks really clear when you use the Rollex on top of it. So I would still suggest using the paper. It's just easier and you'll still see it. It won't just kind of fade away with the Rollex.
Mm-hmm. What kind of materials is it safe to apply Rollex adhesive to? What would you say?
So sort of as I mentioned, ceramics, basketry, I think metals are okay. Plastics, sometimes some plastics actually have issue with acetone, so this was a good method for lots of plastics. We do tell people that it is a water-based adhesive, so you don't want to, if you're worried about, say, a basket that has a water-soluble dye, you just want to avoid that area when you're placing the label. We don't put it on, we use the pencil technique for things like paper, and we use a similar technique for textiles by sewing it on that Annabelle mentioned, but and someone had said, we actually use the Tyvek technique. And so we use the Rollex on the Tyvek and then sew the Tyvek on.
This might actually be a good time if all of our presenters want to go ahead and pop on their cameras, just because we have about 7 minutes left. We have a lot of people just kind of asking, what do you do with porous items when it comes to bones and zoology collections, that kind of a thing? What would you all recommend? I mean, I know I've seen everything from working, because back in the day when I did archaeology in an osteology lab, I would see people use like the barrier method with the writing on it. But I would also see people just put paper. So what would you all think would work across that kind of object?
So we obviously still use the paper label technique for that. And actually Nancy and Vicky Kassman both use that technique for Lucy. And actually, I think that's why they started, one of the reasons why they started that technique.
What have you all seen at your institutions?
I've also used the paper label for wood. It's just one of those situations where, because the surface is more porous, you might have to do more an extra application or two to make sure that the paper actually adheres to the surface.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Someone brought up also leather, which I don't know. I'm paper tagging leather probably, or putting it in a container with that. It's kind of what I would incline to. What have you all done with leather? What have you seen in the field?
We don't put we actually don't have a lot of leather in our collection, but we won't directly label. We kind of treat that more like a textile.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I want to go back to an earlier question, which we teased earlier, which someone was asking about clear nail polish used. So how many people, and you can raise your hand, how many people have seen clear nail polish used for object labels in real life? Would you recommend it? No. So I just want to point out, it happens. I've seen whiteout used. I've seen Sharpies used. I've seen lots of things used. It happens. We don't recommend it for many reasons. Do you guys want to? I know for nail polish, it turns yellow. after a while. I've seen
Yeah,
that.
most hard nail polishes are cellulose nitrate based, which will not only will it eventually peel off and yellow, but it will damage your object as it does so.
Yeah, I mean, but it happens, right? Either people thinking this is accessible, it's the same thing, it happens. So I just like to acknowledge that it happens, but we don't try to use it in real life. People are asking also about canvas. How would you recommend numbering canvas prints or unframed canvas? Again, I default to paper tag. I'm a big believer in if I'm not sure, but I still want to put a number on this thing, I paper tag it personally. What are your guys' thoughts on it?
We have, so when we've done paintings, usually they're in a frame. And so of course we label the frame itself and then do a paper tag. So we doubles put the number on. Or if it has a wood backing, we would put the label on the wood as opposed to putting on the canvas or directly on a piece of paper.
Yeah, exactly. We have about 4 minutes left. I'm going to keep going through as many questions as I can. Before we do that, I want to point out that in the chat, there's the survey that we ask everyone to take for our webinars. Please click on that link. You'll also get a reminder email about it too. So I wanted to throw that out there before we actually wrap it up. Also, someone pointed out that they've seen those old school 70s plastic label maker tapes, which we had one when I was a kid, and I thought it was the most fascinating thing to mankind, but we do not need to use those.
Yeah, they're called dino tape, and we actually have some in our collection as well.
Yeah, I love them. When I was a kid, I was like, this is magic. And I'm going to keep using this thing. So other people are asking, what is the best method for an uneven surface like a projectile point? Do you guys have any recommendations for that?
So sorry, I'll say we use paper labels for that. We make them kind of small and we try to find the most flattest part, but you can, sometimes what I do with paper labels is sometimes they're very flat. So you can kind of just take a bamboo skewer and kind of roll out the paper to make it a little less, have as much structure to it basically. And then we put it on the object, but it works fine.
Okay. Anyone else have experience with projectile points or anything kind of like that?
I've also used B72 in an archaeology lab, and that worked well.
Excellent. It was mentioned that those micron pens don't work well with B72 labeling. Is there a permanent ink pen that you would recommend that doesn't bleed under the final layer of B72?
So in preparation for this video, I tested about 5 different types of pens just to make sure, and I let each of them dry about half an hour just to make sure, and all of them, weird things happen in different labs, and something might work for you that didn't work for me, but just none of them worked. Not pigment based, not micron, not an India ink, not anything that came in a ready-made pen.
Anyone else have any recommendations or thoughts? Someone has a pretty specific question, which is just interesting because I think we've come across these kind of items before. So it's sort of specific to something I'm accessioning, but how would you label a cardboard box of toys where you can't really attach a tag because of the shape and the cardboard is printed on? So how would you attack that kind of an object in each of your ways, or would you?
I would consider a pencil if that's an option, if that actually works well on an area.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very specific question. Sometimes I would ask people, can you show me the object? That might be easier, and I can tell you whether a paper label would be appropriate for that or whether a pencil would be better. Or if you need to just put it in a box that's labeled and make a very large tag.
Yes, exactly. I mean, I know I've had containers where I've just put the label, and this isn't the best because it can get detached and then you run into that whole issue. But I've just stuck the label within the object. It's in the box and been and then what you said, maybe put an enclosure around it that hopefully will keep the things together. I think it's hard, and we'll kind of do this as a wrap up because it is 2:30 Eastern, my time. But I think, you do your best, right? You make sure that whatever your labeling method is reversible, because that is always one of the key things in our world. But, you just do your best and you try to put numbers on them, because if you have those those found in object collections that you're just like, what is this thing? And it's become disassociated, then it's kind of lost it's lost a lot of value, unfortunately, which is sad when that happens. So, well, it's 2:30. So I want to say a huge thank you to everyone for participating in this. Thank you for your videos. They were great. Right now, the plan is to put the entire webinar with the Q&As and everything up on the FAIC AIC YouTube page. And then I'm also hoping to segment out just your little videos. So if people just want to watch a quick video on how to label things, those will be accessible and they'll be able to view it. So hopefully everyone has enjoyed it. Please use that survey to comment if you like this format. We can see about exploring more objects or items with it. And with that, I'm going to say thanks to IMLS, thanks to FAIC, thanks to Learning Times, our producer. Thank you again to all of our speakers. You guys did a great job. You could be equal to those Instagram videos we have all watched of people cooking things in their kitchen and they magically appear done. I think you guys have made just as good videos of that. So a huge thank you. And we will see you all in March for our next webinar, March 10th with the Realm Project. And if you're interested in that course that I spoke about earlier, go to connectingtocollections.org. So thanks everyone. I'm going to say bye. And also all the emails for our speakers are on the website as well. So if you want to reach out to them personally, please do so there. So thanks guys, appreciate it. And we will see you next month.